Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a historical military operation from the Umayyad era that honestly reads exactly like a modern-day Hollywood heist thriller. I mean, if you thought ancient warfare was just, massive armies running at each other on an open field, well, prepare to be surprised. We're looking at a crazy story of strategy, stealth, and absolute unflinching nerves of steel. This is the story of how a supposedly unconquerable mountain fortress was brought to its knees by just a handful of men in the dead of night.
So, let's dive right into this with a massive, mind-bending question that the legendary commander Qutayba bin Muslim faced during his campaigns. As the Muslim forces expanded into Central Asia, right up to the borders of Persia and Turkestan, they hit a literal and figurative brick wall. They came across an obstacle that stopped absolutely immense armies dead in their tracks. So how exactly do you take a stronghold that's completely disconnected from the ground below? How do you conquer a mountain fortress that its defenders bragged even angels couldn't reach?
Well, to answer that, we need to look at Section 1, the impregnable mountain fortress.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of the problem facing the Muslim forces, we have to look at this massive number, 1,500. Their target was the fortress of Sughdiyan Fortress. It was securely held by the Magian king, Tarkun Gorak, and it sat atop a sheer 1,500-foot vertical cliff face. Guys, that is taller than the Empire State Building. It was so impossibly high that historical accounts literally described clouds passing below it. Just imagine looking up from the valley floor and seeing your target hiding way up there in the sky.
And this mountain wasn't just tall, it was essentially a smooth vertical wall. Even just getting close to the base was a completely lethal endeavor, because the bottom was entirely surrounded by deep, highly dangerous trenches. You couldn't roll any siege engines up to it, and no standard ladders were going to reach even a fraction of the way to the top. It was like a giant puzzle with no visible solution.
To make matters even worse, the defenders had prepared flawlessly. There was only one single access point, this extremely narrow, difficult path that snaked up the mountain, and it was completely choked with heavily fortified defensive posts. On top of that, the Magians inside had stockpiled enough food and water to easily outlast months of a traditional siege. They could literally just sit up there in the clouds and wait it out.
Which brings us to Section 2, the impossible siege.
You see, this whole setup resulted in a frustrating, incredibly deadly stalemate. Every single time the Muslim forces attempted a frontal assault up that one narrow path, they essentially walked right into a meat grinder. The defenders held the ultimate high ground, they rained down boiling oil, hurled heavy stones, and fired poisoned arrows onto the totally exposed troops below. Time and time again, the attackers had to retreat, suffering severe casualties without making even a dent in the fortress's doors.
And adding insult to injury was the intense psychological warfare. King Tarkun Gorak would actually look down from his 1,500-foot balcony and just mock the Islamic army. He'd taunt them, shouting, "If you have flying birds or angels, come up, otherwise it is impossible for humans to reach here." He was supremely confident. And honestly, based on the traditional military tactics of that era, he hit the nail on the head. He was absolutely right.
But that changes in Section 3, the Midnight Commandos. Because every great heist needs an inciting incident, right? A window of opportunity where the impossible suddenly becomes possible. That happened when a massive heavy rainstorm rolled into the valley. The overconfident fortress guards figured the sheer rock faces, which were already impossible to climb dry, would be absolute suicide in the slick, freezing, pouring rain. So they abandoned their posts along the cliff edges to go seek shelter. And Commander Qutayba? He immediately spotted this fatal flaw in their complacency.
So here is the crucial point. The commander didn't rally his entire army to exploit this opening. A loud, clanking army would have tipped off the guards instantly. Instead, he selected a tiny, incredibly elite squad. We're talking just 5 men. But these weren't your run-of-the-mill soldiers. These were guys described as being literally made of iron. They were handpicked for their unparalleled expertise in rock climbing and their absolute, unquestioning fearlessness.
Utilizing what was essentially an ancient version of grappling hook technology, these 5 men tied ropes to heavy, spiked iron claws. Then, they used their bows to shoot these claws high up into the crevices of the wet rock face. And right then, in the pitch black of the storm, buffeted by harsh winds and freezing rain, they began a terrifying 1,500-foot vertical ascent.
Now, the stakes here were absolute life and death, and tragically, the climb was not flawless. High above the ground on that slick, rain-swept stone, one of these elite soldiers lost his grip. He fell to his death into the deep trenches below, martyred right there in the dark. But the mental fortitude of the squad was just unimaginable. Despite watching their brother fall, the remaining 4 commandos didn't panic. They didn't retreat. They just gritted their teeth and kept climbing up into the storm.
Following the timeline here, just moments before the break of dawn, the time of Sughdiyan, the 4 survivors miraculously reached the top. They breached the outer wall completely undetected. Once they were secured, they immediately dropped these long, heavy ropes all the way down the cliff face. Waiting silently at the bottom was a larger strike force of about 100 heavily armed commandos, who quickly and quietly scaled the ropes right into the beating heart of the enemy stronghold.
Let's break down exactly how this plays out in Section 4, a masterclass in tactics.
Because, as we know, getting inside is only half the heist, right? You still have to take the vault. A frontal assault was predictable and deadly, but this stealth infiltration completely flipped the script. Once those 100 commandos were inside, they blew a massive war bugle. Down below, the main Muslim army launched a loud decoy frontal assault on the main path. The panicked defenders rushed to the front choke point, turning their backs on the infiltration squad, who then seamlessly fought their way to the main gates and threw them wide open from the inside.
The result of this incredible maneuver was total, absolute victory. Those arrogant defenders who had literally mocked the army from the clouds just a day before, they were utterly defeated. An impregnable fortress that had easily withstood months of traditional siege warfare fell in a matter of mere hours. And the whole shebang happened simply because they changed the angle of attack and leveraged an unimaginable level of courage.
You know, what's really amazing to me is how perfectly this ancient operation maps onto modern military doctrine. Today, military analysts look at this as a textbook historical example of a surprise attack utilizing commando tactics. It completely aligns with modern special forces strategy, bypassing the enemy's strongest points to strike at hidden vulnerabilities, relying entirely on stealth, speed, and highly specialized elite units.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. We tend to think of special operations and elite commando units as, modern inventions, things born in the 20th century. But if commanders were successfully pulling off impossible gravity-defying heists like this over 1,000 years ago, what other incredible operations, brilliant tactics, and forgotten acts of sheer human will are just waiting to be uncovered in the pages of history? Think about that for a second. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep exploring.